Hello, everyone. How are you all doing this afternoon? Good? Very good. I'm glad to have you all here. Yes, my name is Alex Lyman. I'm the executive director at the Robert Louis Stevenson Museum here in St. Helena. Very exciting global literary legacy that we have the world's largest publicly accessible collection of Stevenson material in the world, more than in Scotland, more than in Samoa. Well, I'm not used to a microphone. I'm a projector, but this is good. More than Samoa, more than Scotland. So it's really exciting to be a part of that legacy. So I'll forward this talk just a little bit with the fact that I will be upfront with all of you that I am not a historian. I am a curator, an artist, a collaborator, but most of all, I am an enthusiast. And that's really what I'm here to share with you. And we're going to talk today about Robert Louis Stevenson in California. And though my lecture here and the slides that you'll see do have the dates, some figures, and the historical data, what I really want to impart with you all today was that California helped inspire and define Robert Louis Stevenson as we know him. His legacy could have been something much different from the accomplished fiction writer that most people know Robert Louis Stevenson as without that time in California. So I'm going to be, and I started it right there. And another caveat is this is my first time doing this lecture. We've developed my notes and my PowerPoint here, but so thank you for all joining me for this inaugural presentation. So very excited to have you all here. But we're going to start with just a little bit about who Robert Louis Stevenson was before we knew him as the writer of Treasure Island, Jekyll and Hyde, Kidnapped, and much more. We have photographed there a young teenage Stevenson in Scotland. And you can see, normal young boy, but he did grow up in a family of engineers from Edinburgh. They were in particular lighthouse engineers, and he had a close relationship with those lighthouses, the sea, the craggy cliffs that kind of defined a lot of his childhood. And in the beginning, like I mentioned, Stevenson was not known in his own time at the start as a writer of fiction. He was known as an essayist. He wrote for newspapers, for magazines, mostly nonfiction, observational essays, and small histories and nonfiction analysis. He was born in 1850 Edinburgh, and his parents saw from an early age, though, that he was inspired to be a writer. We have in our museum one of his first written works, The Story of Moses, written when he was about 5 or 6 for a family writing competition. He came in second place and got a new Bible, but from the start, he had that passion for writing. And while his parents didn't quite understand it, one through line that they could see for this passion was stepping to the bar and becoming a lawyer. They paid for his schooling in law, and there is one very stately, impressive photograph that we have of Stevenson in his barrister's regalia, and he would go on to practice the law and wear that dignified uniform exactly once. He would take the money that his parents gave him to start his own practice, and he would take it on a European canoeing, kayaking, and hiking trip. He had a spirit of adventure that, despite being born with some severe health issues, he had a spirit of adventure that could not be contained. So he took that money and ran. And one of his first locations that he ran to was France. where he had an artist cousin, a very bohemian cousin, Robert Stevenson, who was a known painter in his time, mostly of French and other European landscapes. And it was in that artist colony in France where Robert Louis Stevenson would meet Fanny Vandergrift Osborne, who was a dowdy, resilient very American frontierswoman, really. She was an Oakland native who had followed a philanderous kind of ne'er-do-well husband chasing gold in the American Southwest. He was known to have affairs with a number of women within the towns he was there. Once Fanny was reported to have come home to an empty house. The furniture was gone. And it was only through some investigation that she found out that her husband had loaned all of the parlor furniture to a mistress. So Fanny had had enough of that. She was done, and she was an artist in her own right and would take her children all the way from the American Southwest to France, where she would go to an artist's colony with her children and learn painting, writing, and really, again, become a developed painter in her own right. Now, yes, Grèce-sur-Loing in 1876, and Stevenson was immediately struck by her. We have letters at the museum where she writes back to family in America of the mad Scotsman who was pursuing her romantically. He was described to having been actually crawling through a pub window when he first saw her to introduce himself. And at the time, she was actually romantically linked to Stevenson's cousin. But Stevenson pursued her, and eventually, even though she was still technically married, they would fall in love. And it was that love, that inspiration, that brought this sickly but impassioned Scotsman all the way from Europe to the very real edge of civilization in some ways, to the California coast, which is what we're here to talk about today. So we have at the bottom there a few facts and numbers, and one in particular, interesting fact to me in particular, and Fanny was a historical figure that since my time at the museum, I've learned a lot about on my own, and we're hoping to feature her more in the museum in the future. But she was almost 10 years Stevenson senior, which was very unusual for the time, in particular her being an American woman. But it was that love that would eventually bring Stevenson across the Atlantic Ocean and all the way to America. On August 7th, 1879, against his family's wishes, his various colleagues, professionally, he went on the ship Devonia and went all the way to New York, and then would board a train, taking that train all the way across America to California. During that time on the Devonia and during the voyage across, he would work on the travelogue short writing, The Amateur Immigrant. The Amateur Immigrant, yes. Because Stevenson had a comfortable, if thrifty, second-class cabin, but he had a fascination, of course, with the passengers in steerage. These were poorer immigrants who were really just there with the luggage of the ship, but he spent most of his time below the floors learning the stories of these people coming to America. And he really, even though he came from an upper middle class family, he, again, this pervasive sense of adventure was inspired during this ship and by these people's experience. And we'll see that attitude continue as he travels across America, and in particular during his time in our part of California, in the Bay Area and in the Upper Valley. So yes, the Union Pacific Railroad, the ocean crossing took 10 days. Rail journey across the continent took 12 more. He saw the Great Plains, he saw mountains, the rivers, and it's astounding to me to imagine the stark contrast between the cultural architecture of Europe, somewhere with centuries of lore, of unspoken cultural attitudes and development, both physically and culturally, that I think for Stevenson, having that European assignation would almost be a burden. And I think that the open expanses and the untamed nature of America, particularly of California, will become a major point of inspiration for Stevenson, as we'll see. So California, his first real stop in California, from a foggy Monterey camp. We have a painting there. We have a bit of a California timeline. He was only here for about 11 months, about 3,000 miles of rail and ocean journey. And again, all of that journey came because he was determined to marry Fanny Vandergrift. So August 7th, he departs Scotland. August 30th, after that rail train from New York, he arrives in Monterey. From Monterey, he comes to San Francisco, only 10 days after Fanny's divorce was finalized. May 19th, we have their marriage on Post Street in San Francisco. May 22nd through July is when, of course, they came from San Francisco, past Vallejo, past Napa, but up to St. Helena and Calistoga for their infamous Silverado honeymoon. And then by July 29th, he had departed California, back to New York, where he would stay for some time, then back to Scotland. So that's kind of a rough timeline, but we'll see how these major points, in particular Monterey, San Francisco, and our own Upper Valley, really inspired Stevenson and transformed Stevenson from this observer and essayist to a full-fledged fiction novelist that he wasn't before that time. 11 months bridge on an ocean crossing, the courtship's end, marriage, and material for 3 books and a number that would come after that time.
Why he had made such an arduous and long journey and only stayed here for not even a year. Like, why didn't he go right back to Scotland?
Yeah, part of that would be his parents' health. Part of that would be he was ready for the next leg of his journey. After he would go back to Scotland and then through America again, he would leave from San Francisco and journey the South Pacific, Hawaii, and where he would eventually end his, not end his own life, but his life would end in Samoa. So it was, but really the core of it and what we can see through letters that he himself wrote and his family wrote, it really was that love for Fanny that brought him here. And really, even more than that marriage, we'll see that that marriage would bring about a whole professional support network as well. His stepchildren would become major collaborators and a co-writer even of some of his works. But yes, so if you do have questions during, I will answer those questions during, but we'll also do questions at the end too. Yes?
What was the nature of his sickness?
Yes, so Robert Louis Stevenson was born very young with, well, he was born when he was born, no, he wasn't born very young, but very young, he had health issues that to kind of the general eye would be very similar to tuberculosis. Coughing, blood was the major symptom, but general sickly, he was a sickly guy. He describes himself at times as a collection of bones, chills, and aches. And there is evidence that he took a tuberculosis test later in life, but that it was negative. Now, his parents had a similar affliction, and the general consensus at this time is that he suffered from a congenital pulmonary and heart disorder that largely expressed itself through respiratory trauma. He would die of a brain hemorrhage on Samoa, likely related to the physical burdens of that illness. But again, that illness did not define him, and he was able to push through that sickness and really live the spirit of adventure that he would only later, after his experiences in California, impart into his fiction writing. And his first major stop in California was one of my favorite spots, the beautiful Monterey. And he ended up in Monterey just physically devastated. He was sick, he was penniless, he was broken down, and he didn't even have a place to stay within Monterey. He was on the verge of physical collapse, but it was his first kind of stop on his way there. We have a great quote here that from the hills of Monterey, he said, and this was true of much of his experience with California, that it looks down on much green, intricate country. Something that really follows through in his observations about California as a whole. Now, Monterey, he arrived there August 30th, 1879, and he stayed at the French Hotel, which would later be renamed the Stevenson House, which is still there. Fanny was living near Monterey at that time at Casa Bonifacio with her children, as well as a sister, Nellie Vandergrift. Now, Stevenson's time in Monterey would introduce him to a lot of true American character. And Monterey being a port city, there were sailors, porters, fishermen, and a lot of the attitudes and cultural figures that he would experience in Monterey would absolutely help define the kind of color of the cast of Treasure Island. And in Monterey, despite this kind of arriving with sickness, he was taken by the physical beauty of Monterey, its proximity to the ocean, the green, gray forests. But Stevenson also, and we can kind of see this with his interest in the steerage passengers, Stevenson was known to have kind of a morbid curiosity. This may be because he understood from a young age that he had a closer relationship with death and the potential of death, I think, than a lot of people may have had at that time. And so one artifice expression of that morbid curiosity when he came to Monterey was something a lot of, misbehaving children might feel. But he thought while on a hike, will that moss burn? And he actually wrote home that he tried that experiment out. He wasn't sure if the damp moss would catch fire, but it did indeed. It actually caused quite a blaze. He would write back saying, "Oh, I must have been under the influence of Satan. He was terrified." And he knew at the time that that's something that he could have been hanged for. So that was a brief kind of flirtation with disaster while he was there in Monterey. And he would write about Monterey in the travelogue, The Old Pacific Capital. And he was fascinated by California's contemporary history in terms of California being a place, at this time of immediate progress, abandonment, and reinvention. He described California as a land of ghost towns, in particular in his experiences as he moved up the coast and in Vallejo. I'll touch back a bit on that. And another major point of interest for Stevenson in Monterey was the Chinese immigrants and the fishing village on the outskirts of the town. And he wrote vividly about that, and that interest in Chinese culture, in particular the Chinese Californian immigrant experience, would continue with his time in San Francisco. So leaving Monterey, he would continue up our coast to San Francisco. On December 22nd, 1879, after the divorce was finalized, Stevenson moved to San Francisco to be nearer Fanny's family. They lived on almost nothing. The estimates that I was finding was that it was about 45 cents a day, inflation and changes in currency, but they were next to penniless. And he would write by correspondence and maintain an income by continuing his essay and observational writing for magazines and newspapers in England. Though San Francisco's temperature and climate would still prove harsh on Stevenson's health. The ongoing remedy for a lot of those kind of respiratory issues in that time was a prescription for warmer climates. And San Francisco and Scotland, it was still a little difficult for him there. But his time in San Francisco would really be defined by this fascination with the change of pace and the modernity that San Francisco had compared to Edinburgh and Scotland. Talking again about that perception of Europe at the time being this heavily defined, almost oppressive cultural architecture with really the frontier, the kind of artistic, literary Wild West of the edge of what was kind of the Western world of California. And again, in San Francisco, he would become fascinated and very progressively involved with the Chinese immigrant community in San Francisco. And again, we have anecdotal and observational evidence of Stevenson spending time with the Chinese immigrants on fishing boats going through the bay, up and down the coast, and witnessing different scenes along the coast that would absolutely inform visual imagery that would carry over into Treasure Island. And within Chinatown itself, there is a direct through line that even though he was fascinated by the vivid colors and culture and food, he also saw the dangerous, hazy edge of that community in the opium dens that would also populate Chinatown. And we can see some of that vaporous horror translate into Jekyll and Hyde, another work that would come after his time in California. But again, the whole reason Stevenson was here, this bundle of nerves and aches, was for love. On May 19th, 1880, Fanny and Stevenson married quietly in San Francisco. The Reverend William Anderson Scott preceded the marriage. We actually have their marriage license and wedding rings right on display in the gallery at the museum. And this really, even by Stevenson's own account, was the most important event of his life. Finding this, again, almost incongruously sturdy American woman and this frail bohemian writer from Scotland found a very fascinating union. One that has really been a joy for me as executive director at the museum and learning about that legacy. Again, something that I'm hoping to highlight more in the future. And Fanny would really become part of his literary process, an editor, an inspiration, a voice to talk to. She was known long after this point to have read Stevenson's first draft of Jekyll and Hyde and told him to throw it out and that original draft doesn't exist. He was said to have burned it. And it was with her, it is now historically allocated that she is the one who pushed Stevenson to really explore the psychological horror, not just the physical horror of the transformation. So yeah, she's been a fascinating figure and part of California's own history, from Oakland and bringing this global, or what would eventually become this global literary legacy, and anchoring it here, however briefly, in California. Now, of course, after a marriage comes a honeymoon, and that is what would take this couple all the way from San Francisco up here to our valley, which at that time, despite new roads and train travel, was still an arduous journey, especially for Stevenson, who again was just I keep saying it, but he was not a well man, health-wise. But the only thing to do, after a marriage was a honeymoon, and that would bring them up. Passing through Vallejo, it would only be published after his time in California, but the most famous connection to our valley here is the Silverado Squatters, his travelogue of that journey up valley at his time on Mount St. Helena. But in between San Francisco and here, he has an interesting observation about Vallejo, going back to my mention of ghost towns and how Stevenson saw California as kind of a territory of ghost towns, because he was coming towards the end of the gold rush and silver mining, and he would see the vestiges of that sudden jump-started success and then it be abandoned. And Vallejo in particular, he described as kind of a progression of ghost towns. As the town expanded, older parts would be abandoned. And it's fascinating to me of Stephen's perspectives, again, coming from Europe where history is in every step, but seeing history made in California almost at the same time as that history was being abandoned, I think is a really fascinating juxtaposition, that California and maybe even the broader character of America, seeing that progress almost eat itself as it moves forward in time. So the observation of Vallejo, just of a particular interest to me. But eventually that journey would bring them to Napa Valley and Calistoga. No, I did not. Oh, sorry. So when they arrived here, they were not in a financial position to really take as much advantage of the already established resorts and everything that was here. He would visit them, but again, going back to, despite his frailty, this sense of adventure, and he was somehow able to convince his wife and stepson that their honeymoon shouldn't be in the town or the resort, but on an abandoned mining camp on Mount St. Helena. He really lived that adventure that he longed so much for as a kid. We have a painting here of the Bale Grist Mill, of course. It was founded in the 1860s, reachable by rail since 1868, and then continued by stagecoach on what would eventually become the Silverado Trail. And he would visit a number of famous valley locations, like the Springs Hotel in Calistoga, the Pine Flats, the Petrified Forest, and much of Lake County. Now, the mining camp was called Pine Flat, and it had, Pine Flat is where they were supposed to go. They couldn't. And in Silverado Squatters, he details a number of the local characters that would populate the area. In particular, the Jewish shopkeeper Kelmer and his family. They were a major kind of figure in the area, and he would recommend the abandoned silver mine on Mount St. Helena. They moved into the camp on June 9th, but maybe unsurprisingly, after being there for only about a week, Fanny and her son became violently ill, and they had to travel all the way back down the mountain and recuperate. But against all odds, Stevenson got them back up on the mountain after their recovery. And Stevenson's writing during this time really describes the frontier's attitude of the Californians, the industriousness, but also the fascinating balance that they maintain with the natural beauty that they lived in and that we still live in. California and our valley is still one of the most beautiful spots I've had the opportunity to visit and live in. And so having Stevenson's legacy, or having that be a part of Stevenson's legacy, has been a real privilege and a fascinating contextualization of what would become a global legacy. Now, when they returned to Silverado after that time being ill, they would also bring the painter Joseph Dwight Strong with them, who at the time had just married, had just married Fanny's daughter, Isabel, or Belle. And their nearest neighbors, again, Calistoga, St. Helena were fairly established at that time, but up on the hill it was very isolated. But their nearest neighbors were Rufa Hansen and his wife. And Rufa Hansen was the toll booth manager. And apparently and this is me learning more about St. Helena and Calistoga's history as I've researched Stevenson's. He was kind of an amateur detective who had spoiled some kind of a wagon, a stagecoach robber. But Stevenson does write about them that he was kind of difficult, but that his wife was the sharper, more socially graceful of the two. But they would become friends and neighbors throughout that stay. But he was only there for about 8 weeks there in St. Helena, or at the mining camp during that time.
We're talking like no running water, I bet.
No running water, no anything. Yeah, well, at the time, the preparation of water, grain barrels, boiling, bringing all those provisions by stagecoach up with them. And in Silverado Squatters, he does talk about the difficulty and multiple breakdowns of the stagecoaches and supplies that they would try to bring there.
Where did it bring the there's no?
There were springs, and I don't have a note about those springs, but there were springs, but they were not tapped springs. So it was.
I believe there's still there more.
Yes, yeah. There are still these abandoned tunnels that go through the mountains, and even though the camp isn't there anymore, there is a commemoration there of its original location. But so this honeymoon, this adventurous honeymoon, would really cement their love with each other. And again, it wasn't that he had just found a love of his life, but he found a partner, a collaborator, and a supporter. Something, that he obviously really needed. Because he continued those issues throughout his time. So it wasn't long before, the innumerable variety of greens. Really beautiful quote describing our valley in particular from Silverado Squatters. Something that I hold with me every day when I go hiking or any chance outside, seeing the yellows, greens that we have in our valley, knowing that those were the same that Stevenson saw is very inspiring. But I do think that it is interesting that within Silverado Squatters, he does use the word green many times over. Now, you may not know this, but Stevenson was once approached by a young neighbor in Scotland long after he had become a much more famous writer. And this young lady wanted to be a writer herself. And so she asked Stevenson to read a sample of her writing. And his biggest criticism of her writing was that she described the lawn in front of her house as green. And he discouraged her from ever using the word green because we know that lawns are green. We know that trees are green. And so he encouraged her to never use the word green within her writing. But in Silverado Squatters, it does come up a number of times. And again, because we do enjoy here in the Valley the innumerable variety of greens. Yes?
Is that one of Fanny's paintings?
That is not one of Fanny's paintings. That is a Virgil Williams painting of the passage by Mount Tam, I believe. I have a deck, and I'll talk a little bit more about the art towards the end. But yes, so after that time, so this is a. I'll keep a note of having the painter's information a bit more apparent for myself. But this was just a brief change. And of course, that Silverado Squatters, the Silverado mining camp, but the Silverado Trail would be named after that time. And so Stevenson's legacy kind of cemented that term Silverado within our Valley's lexicon. And in 1944, the park was named Robert Louis Stevenson State Park, still there today. The mountain, of course, is still there today, but it is also still a park, and a beautiful one. So yes, those 2 months in summer, Louis, Fanny, and Fanny's 12-year-old son, Lloyd, they squatted in the abandoned bunkhouse, May 22nd to late July. Another Virgil Williams painting there that can be found in our gallery. One that's really particularly evocative of my own childhood. I spent a lot of time in the creeks and dried stream beds of the valley, so that's a particular favorite of mine. So again, this was a brief time. After that honeymoon, he would go back to San Francisco, and from there back to New York and back to Scotland. He would come back to California for kind of his final journey to the South Pacific. But we can see after his time in California, a major shift in his writing. California, within those 6 years after California, is when Stevenson wrote and published Treasure Island, Kidnapped, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and those California experiences really helped shape those stories. The deeper legacy of his time in California was not just literary, but again, his family, his collaborators, and the professional discipline to write through both physical and environmental trauma, but more than that, a wider vista of experience that would inform his work and give life to such powerful characters like Long John Silver. Those attitudes found here in California can really be traced into what he would see. And then from there, after California and writing Treasure Island, Jekyll and Hyde, that is where we start to see RLS as the Stevenson that we all know now, the famous global Western canon pillar of literature. One of the most adapted and translated writers in the world, and not just in literary adaptations, but of course, film, television, expanding to pop culture. But those experiences in California, again, however brief that time was, those experiences allowed him to break through new ground and finding himself as a new kind of writer. He had always had a powerful command of descriptive language, but applying that creative detail into his fiction work and the horror and adventure and kinetic momentum of that writing is really only found in these works after California, like the Master of Ballantrae, kidnapped Jekyll and Hyde, and others. Yes, often credited. I did mention that one. And so that is really the broads ended a little shorter than I had anticipated. But that is really, again, what I wanted to impart today. Like I said, I am not a historian, but I am an enthusiast. And seeing Stevenson's legacy and having part of something so foundational to our global literary canon right here in St. Helena, again, the world's largest collection of publicly accessible Stevenson material, it's a real honor, not just curating Stevenson's legacy, but knowing how much California created the writer and the works that we know him from. And a last quote that I have here on the slideshow from Silverado Squatters, one that has stuck with me. The society of these bright streams. Something, it's a favorite line of mine because it is in some ways how I picture our part of California. The bay, the ocean, the rivers, the estuaries, the streams, and these different locations, Monterey, San Francisco, Vallejo, Napa, St. Helena, Calistoga, connected by that water, by that momentum, and Stevenson following that trail and finding himself here. It's really exciting to be not just a part of that legacy, but to be a part of California and be a part of the California that helped inspire that legacy. So if anyone has any questions, I did go a little quicker than I thought, but thank you very much. Yes?
What was the name of the boat that I think he used in the South Pacific? That's up in Seattle.
Could you repeat the question to Jennifer?
Yes, though I don't have the best answer. The question was the name of the boat, and that's the boat that he took into the South Pacific. The Devonia is the boat he took from Edinburgh to New York. The Casco?
Yeah, this is a much smaller.
The Casco.
Probably 30 feet long, and
Yeah.
was there ever
The Equator, yes. The Casco was another boat.
The same length?
I wish we could.
I think at one time.
Really?
Could do that. But it's up in Seattle.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I'm always looking for more.
It's being neglected right now.
Yeah,
They don't do anything with it, and they don't even show it.
the Equator. I'll look into that, absolutely. We have a few signs from the Casco and one other on loan from the San Francisco Maritime Museum that are on display in the gallery. But I will look into the Equator more. I'm always looking to how to expand our umbrella and what more we can bring in. Oh, maybe it's been dismantled, which is a shame. Oh, Port of Everett. I know Port of Everett. I used to live in Seattle. Yes.
I read the book about Fanny Osborne that it's about.
Oh, yes.
Squatters. I don't ever see any evidence that he's stopped in San Helena.
In Silverado Squatters, he does talk about St. Helena.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure why they would omit that, but he definitely came through St. Helena proper during his time up to Calistoga.
They did spend time here. He was with Joseph Schramm, wasn't he?
Yes, he did. The Schramm's winery was there during that time. I'd have to go over our sources, but I'm almost certain that during some of that time that he did come into St. Helena proper. Maybe he did just travel through. Again, I'm still learning the legacy here in St. Helena and the Stevens travels myself. So in the future, you may see a more historically complete picture than what I provided here today. But St. Helena did definitely figure into his travel in this area, even if it wasn't extended. stop. Yes?
My name is Dan, and I help the locals again. So I've actually done quite a bit of reading because, to get some background. One of the things that's really interesting, he was very disciplined. Like when he was living in San Francisco, he lived on the 400 block on 4th Street. So that was about 4 blocks from where I used to live. And he'd go to this little restaurant that is one of the restaurants that I used to go to all the time. And he would he'd eat this huge meal, have a bottle of wine, then he'd go have coffee, and then he'd go to work until late at night. And he used to go down to in Chinatown, he was fascinated by that.
Yes.
He spent time in Parsons Square, which is a big square in San Francisco, and it's the whole Chinese community. And so he was really fascinated with that. But, something I think we forget is that he was also a traveler.
Yes, and that is really at his time what he was known as.
All these travel experiences to take with him, he kept home and carried him with him.
Yeah, those essays and travelogues at the time, that is what Stevenson was known for. And another thing that is important that I should feature a bit more in this lecture in the future is his time in California was really the first time that he had to completely support himself as a writer. And it was through that correspondence writing with journals and magazines in Europe. But it is really when, this was without parents' support, without family money, and he managed, but a big part of how he managed was that discipline and routine that he was able to provide for himself. Yes?
So he's writing these essays in California. How did the essay get to London, and how did the money come back?
Yeah, I looked into a little bit about the process, but they had publishers that would travel from just using the U.S. mail system. Publisher houses on the East Coast would disperse the material back. So it was a prolonged process, but it was through courier services that he was able to get those payments. And past that point, his publishers were actually put under pressure from his family. Stevenson's writing at the time, particularly his attitudes towards the immigrant populations that he experienced on his travels, were very controversial at the time. And there was actually some pushback from both his family and his publishers on how forward and involved he was with those experiences. The amateur immigrant, his father actually went to the publishing house to have it stocked. And the complete edition of The Amateur Immigrant wouldn't come until long after. But so he was able to maintain those relationships with the publishers through just the infrastructure of US, but it was a prolonged and delayed process, which is why, again, he was essentially penniless during his time here. Yes?
Is there a Stevenson Museum in Europe?
There is the Stevenson, there is a writers' museum in Scotland still. There is, in Edinburgh, there is a Stevenson House. There's the Scottish Writers' Museum, and then there is a Stevenson Museum in Saranac, New York, where he stayed one winter, and there is a Stevenson Museum on Samoa, where he would spend the last stretch of his life with his family. And he actually even brought his little old religious Scottish mother all the way from Scotland all the way to Samoa, which is a fascinating journey in of itself. And I can only imagine her experiences. But again, Stevenson in Samoa, he did not isolate himself. There were colonist enclaves and areas where the colonists in Samoa lived, but Stevenson lived apart from those and had a very close relationship with the Samoan natives and a friendship that would extend even during civil conflict between the Samoan natives and the colonists. Several Samoan leaders were imprisoned briefly, and Stevenson would bring them newspapers, letters from family, read to them, extra food. And after that period of civil conflict, the Samoans actually built a road specifically to their property of Vailima. Yes?
You know the exact location of the camp on Mount St. Helena? Was it on the more on the easterly side or the westerly side? What do you know?
I know that it's there. I can't say for sure. I have not been in 20 years, and I'm not great with the orientation, but it is still there. Like the site is commemorated where it's still there, but I can't.
Is it off the woods? Is it in the woods?
No, it's kind of just up on the hill. It's on a pretty exposed part of the mountain.
On the west side?
I believe on the west side.
There's a ranch there that it's a privately owned property, but there's an old stone building on it that at one time, about 40 years ago, the owners at that time claimed that that's where Stevenson is. That's why I asked the question.
Interesting. That's another thing. I'm going to have to look for the second edition of this lecture. I'll get the true location down. Yes.
They stayed in the bunkhouse.
Yes.
Part of the mine.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. And I know that bunkhouse structure isn't there anymore, though we do have an astounding miniature model of the bunkhouse in the gallery. I think that every museum needs some kind of miniature model of something. I used to work at the San Diego Model Railroad Museum, so I was around miniature models all the time. So we're very proud of that model. And what's more than just the model is the creator of the model of the bunkhouse actually documented the work that he did. And we have that in our little bookshop. Just kind of his journal of creating that model. So fascinating to kind of see the physical history, then the miniature history, and then the personal history that comes with it. Yes?
So what about Fanny? Did she continue to paint, or did she go to Samoa with him?
Yes, they were in Samoa, and then after Stevenson would pass away, they would live there for a time, but she would come back and settle in San Francisco along with her children. And I believe that it was after that time that Hyde Street became Hyde Street because it was her residence and the connection to Stevenson, I believe. I might have to double check that, but I believe. Yes?
So how old was he when he died?
Stevenson was about 44, 45 when he died.
And then how old was she when she died?
Another thing I will add to future versions, but she lived for quite some time after that, yes. Yes. She was in her early 50s, or she was in her kind of later half of her 50s when he passed away. But I believe she lived at least until her late 60s, 70s in San Francisco. But good details that I'll be sure to incorporate in the future. Yes?
It's not my question, but it just occurred to me. Was it a mercury mine or a silver mine?
Silver, yes.
Okay, two things. You probably know, he was pretty good friends with Jacob Schramm.
Yes.
Who was a barber, actually, but then he built the winery, and the Chinese had a lot to do with building that winery.
They did.
So he probably had more experiences with Chinese people in here, too.
Yes, and I made a small movie about Parrot. But yes, the Chinese, I can't remember his name, oh, sorry. But the Chinese immigrant populations, Stevenson would actually go to San Francisco and speak at the Sandlot speeches, which was a kind of public debate forum about the Chinese Exclusion Act, where they were trying to stop and export the Chinese immigrants. And Stevenson was known to have gone there to speak publicly in support of the Chinese immigrants and the labor populations that would be so ubiquitous throughout all of California.
But what I really wanted to say is, as you continue to learn more about Fanny, I hope you will try to delve more into the psychological connection between the two of them, because I've never heard a really good explanation about why they were together. I mean, was it a mommy thing? Was it, what the heck was it? Because that's very strange.
Yeah, they had a fascinating relationship, and there's a lot more there, yes. And there have been some great books that are on my desk now, really focusing on their relationship. And in the future at the museum, we have a number of, on display right now, we only have one of Fanny's paintings, but we have a number of her paintings done in France and throughout her lifetime that in the future we're hoping to put on exhibition in the gallery.
Did she get anywhere with her art? Did people buy her paintings?
I don't know about the kind of commercial process of what her art continued on. Fanny, again, Fanny is not someone I knew about before I took on the position, and she's been one of the most fascinating parts of learning about Stevenson's legacy because she was so integral to, again, the modern interpretation of Robert Louis Stevenson, how we see him as a writer today. So much of that foundational power was found in his partnership with Fanny. So it's certainly one that I'm continuing to learn about myself, and I'm excited to help others learn about that legacy in the future through the museum. Yes?
So how or where did they meet?
They met in France. She had fled her philandering husband, took her kids to an artist colony in France. Again, even though she was this, frontiers woman, she was an artist, and so they were at an artist's colony, and she had an association with Stevenson's cousin, but Robert immediately, madly fell in love with her, and would eventually, they both got what they wanted from each other.
Fanny died in 1914 at 73
Wow.
in Santa Barbara, where she was living.
All right.
And it says her ashes were taken to Samoa.
Oh, yes, and that is where Stevenson was buried. And he was buried in a spot right at the base of the major volcano on Samoa that he had a view of on his deathbed. And that area was a point of major cultural consideration for the Samoan population there. So Tusitala, as he was known to the Samoans, or storyteller, he really was given a spot of honor among that community. And their property there in Samoa is still a Stevenson museum to this day. I'm hoping that my board of directors will buy me a plane ticket over there eventually for some inter-institutional partnerships. Absolutely. Yes?
This is not a question, it's a comment. I find your presentation fascinating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And you're quite the poet yourself.
Oh, thank you. Public speaking, I grew up in Napa. I was involved in the theater program at Napa High. I've worked in public institutions and art institutions most of my professional career, either in theater, museums, or other public-facing culture. So it's something that comes pretty easily for me.
Right?
I do not write in particular. No, I should more, but yes, no, I tend to be a speaker and a presenter. Yes.
Do you have plans to make this available, this presentation online?
This will be available on our YouTube channel.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Subscribe to it and you'll get a notification.
Thank you. I have it so far.
Yes.
I'm interested in how they survived on, let's say, Helena, with nothing, food and all that.
Yeah.
People breaking them.
Yes, they would go into the town, there was supplies. It was still a bustling northern valley post. So there was trade, there was regular commerce. So they were able to travel down. But he does describe it in Silverado Squatters as, an arduous process with supply lines breaking down, wagon wheels breaking, and all of that sort of thing. Absolutely.
So his early writings, when he was writing for the newspapers and whatnot, has anyone amassed a collection of those?
Yes. We actually at the museum earlier this year hosted one of the foremost Stevenson essayist scholars. He has the most recent total collection editorial publication of those essays. But yeah, most of those writings are preserved. And in fact, the museum has a number of original writings and clippings of the writings of that time. Yes.
Just a comment, I mean, growing up here in St. Helena, a lot of us went to RLS middle school. So, Robert Stevenson was just always
Yeah.
in our consciousness.
Yeah, and I'm really hoping, with my experiences in museums, I have been a facilities director, I have taught summer camps, I have designed exhibits, I have done gift shops, I've done a little bit of everything. But one of the things that is at the most forefront of my mind as a museums professional is that a museum needs to be a dynamic and contributory resource to the community that it is in. If it's not, it's just a gallery. It's just artifacts behind glass, which is great, but that just means it could be in the library behind a case. My goal for the Robert Louis Stevenson Museum is to be a participatory resource to the people here in St. Helena. There is so much under that umbrella to connect to multiple generations and so many levels of history to engage with. We have the local history of his time in St. Helena and the valley that we can draw on. But beyond that, there's just the content of his works, which are rich with development. And then there are even broader angles of the pop culture influences, everything from Muppet Treasure Island to The Incredible Hulk to Pirates of the Caribbean, all have their roots in Stevenson's work. And even beyond that, some of our greatest American creatives, particularly in cinema and literature, have referenced Stevenson as an influence. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg have been known in interviews to reference Stevenson's writing as inspiration going back to the 70s. So there is so much under this umbrella, and that is really my goal, to bring all of that to the forefront. Finding the intersectionality between art, history, theater, design, performance, and finding the junctures between those points is really important to me as an artist, as a museums person, and just as a citizen of the world. Finding those connections is absolutely vital.
Could you make a presentation to the school at RLS?
We are working on, we had a very successful creative writing summer camp at the Robert Louis Stevenson Museum this summer, 2 sessions of creative writing for middle schoolers, and we are working on developing that summer program into a curriculum enhancement, not just for the schools here, but as a packaged, licensable educational enhancement that we're hoping to be a national resource.
Is there anything known about the individuals that they met up on the mountain or in the area?
There is, yes.
The characters in the books.
There's no single figure that, at least in my research, there's no single figure that you can trace the line from, oh, he saw this guy at the docks and that became Long John Silver. But the attitude and cultural description is there. And of the individuals named in those stories, there are absolutely historical lines that I'm sure the Historical Society here and in Calistoga and Monterey know some of those histories individually. But otherwise, I think that's everything from me. So thank you all so much for being here.
Wonderful.